Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Pynchon's Wildfire IAQ Managing Smoke and Occupied Building session. We're about to begin. We still have a few attendees trickling in, but we'll just start with a couple of announcements while we still have some people coming to join us today. So thanks everyone for being here. The session you're about to listen to is on wildfire indoor air quality, how to manage smoke in occupied buildings. My name is Heather Swale, and I'm co-presenting today along with Molly Mastel. I am the operations manager of the Indoor Environmental Quality Group here in the Richmond Pynchon office. But don't worry, this presentation isn't all BC focused. We'll talk about solutions that will really apply over the whole, all of Canada as well. Molly is a project coordinator in our Indoor Environmental Quality Group, and we will be co-presenting together today. So a couple of the topics we're going to talk about is I'm going to kick it off and talk about some wildfire trends. Molly will talk about the health effects of wildfire smoke and smoke in occupied buildings. I'll review monitoring smoke and mitigation strategies, and then we'll leave you guys with some information on some tools, how to prepare yourself and what to do for this upcoming wildfire season. So before we kick off the presentation, we have a couple of poll questions and just a few things to chat about. So one thing is there are a couple of tools on Zoom, and I'm sure you guys are pros with Zoom and Teams now from working with home, but here, there are a couple of things. You can use the chat feature if anyone is having any technical problems with the presentation, if you can't see me or the presentation now, if you can't hear anything, please use the chat feature for technical issues. We also have the raise hand button. You can raise your hand now if you're having any problems with seeing or hearing me, and Yasmin will help you out, our host of the presentation. And then we also have a Q&A function. So at the end of the session, we will have some opportunities to ask questions. If you guys could please type out your questions there. If we run out of time and we don't get to them, we'll contact you directly and we can answer anything that maybe we didn't get a chance to if our session does get cut short. So without further ado, let's kick off our first poll question, if you could, please. So our first poll question is, does your building have a wildfire smoke plan? Yes, no, or unsure? We'll wait for some answers to roll in, but I really enjoy using this poll feature in our presentations. It's so hard not to see your faces and be able to interact with you guys directly. So this is a good way for us to kind of get a temperature on the audience, see where you guys are at with this topic, and how we can deliver our presentations, what's the best suited for you. Yasmin, do you have any results for us yet? I think we still have a few people waiting to vote. And I don't see the results yet. There we go. So 64%, wow, that's really interesting. 64% of your buildings do not have a wildfire smoke plan. Well, then it sounds like we have the perfect audience for this presentation today, which is great because we'll tell you exactly what you need in a fire plan and how you guys can prepare for this. That's great. Thanks, Yasmin. If you could put up the second poll question on the screen. So our second question is, what stage of planning are you at for the wildfire smoke season? It sounds like a lot of you may not have started this yet, but our options are, you've written and approved an action plan, you've begun to draft an action plan, or you haven't started one yet. I'm going to guess, based on the results of the first question, that we're going to have a lot of C answers here. But that's okay, that's why you're here, so that's perfect. Can we pull the results now, Yasmin? Thank you. Okay, I was right. I should be a betting woman. 76% of participants have not started a wildfire plan. So that makes sense. We have the right audience. This is perfect. And we'll cap it off with our last poll question, if that's okay, Yasmin. So this last question is, how occupied is your building right now due to COVID-19? Are you guys fully back in the workplace? Are you 100% occupied? Are you 75 to 99% occupied, 50 to 74% occupied, 20 to 49, or less than 25% occupied? And I think this is really interesting. We have people sitting in on this presentation from all over the country, and the different restart plans for the provinces are really, really different right now. So I'm interested to see where you guys are all at with your return to work plans. We're lucky here in BC where Molly and I are. There, June 15th, we're starting our reopening plan. So a few more days, we'll be able to have more people in our offices, some small in-person meetings. I'm really looking forward to it. Can you pull up the results? Perfect. Okay. Really a mixed bag here. So most people have less than 25% occupancy. About 35% of the group has a very low occupied building. But I'm surprised as well. 13% of you are 100% occupied. So a lot of you are already back to work, which is great. And then a majority of us are somehow mixed in the middle with varying occupancies in the middle. That's great. Thanks for participating, everyone. I appreciate it. Okay, so we'll get into our presentation. And the first topic we're going to talk about is wildfire trends. Wildfires have been going on since the dawn of time, and what are we seeing historically? So we don't have to go really far back in the record books to see what's happening and what's changing with wildfires. This is our data from British Columbia. And in the late 90s, what you can see is we've certainly had a lot of fires in the province, but the biggest difference between then and today is the severity of these fires. So on the image on the right, you can see a lot more of the purple circles, the red circles. Those are the really, really big fires that are impacting a huge area. And that's the biggest difference we're seeing as our climate changes, is how big these fires are becoming. So when we look at wildfires today, this is a very timely time for us to present this presentation. The BC Wildfire Service just published their seasonal outlook for the year. It just came out on June 7th, so literally 3 days ago. And they predict what the trends are going to be for the upcoming wildfire season. What they're predicting this year is that they think we're going to have above average fire season in the southern portion of the province, and the northern portion of the province is going to be pretty normal with the historic norms. So pretty interesting. What the BC Wildfire Service does is they produce what you see in this image here is what the daily danger rating is for wildfires. So if you look at the low and very low, those are fires that may start, but probably will not start to grow. And the extreme means this is a huge fire that's going to spread easily, and it's going to be very, very, very large. So if we look back at that data from the 90s and 2016, that really kind of matches what we're looking at here, is we had a lot of fires that started before, but didn't spark into these sort of extreme, really big fire cases. So if we're looking at just what the spring outlook is going to be, looking at the May and June, beginning of June climate forecasts is BC has been warmer and drier than normal. The weather is predicting that that's going to happen in June still, is we're going to have a pretty dry and warm June. And that's really important because June is usually what the precipitation in June and what weather we have usually determines how our wildfire season is going to be in the province here. So if it continues to be at this dry, warm month, it's very likely we're going to have a higher frequency of fires, and again, a lot of really big fires this season. Another thing to consider is as we get into July, that's when we see a lot of the lightning striking, which is a huge ignition source for wildfires. So July, that's when we're going to start seeing a really big uptick in wildfires here. And one thing that's really important is the amount of precipitation we get in June. That's what influences how severe our season is going to be. So in the spring, as the snow melts, that fire, that fuel source dries really quickly. But if we have rainfall throughout June, we know that fuel source stays wetter for longer. It's going to take a longer time to dry out, and we're not going to have as bad of a wildfire season in June. That's why we're sort of surrounding our presentation right now. We're catching you guys right at the start of fire season, so you can put your plans in place now so you're ready to go before things get really severe later in the summer. So as of a couple of days ago, this is the current wildfire trends in BC. This is the BC Wildfire Dashboard. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up in another section of what other tools you can use. But as of June 8th, we've had some fires in the province. We've had 288, and we've had 4 this week. This is a really cool dashboard that will tell you everything going on for the year. It's updated pretty much live every 2 hours. It's a great resource. So this is really the start of our wildfire season. This is going to change really quickly as the summer months go on. So one thing to remember with fire is, why are these getting so severe? Why are we seeing more of those purple dots, more of those red dots on our maps, the severe big fires? The 30-30-30 rule has a lot to do with this. So 30 degrees Celsius or higher, 30 km/h winds or higher, and 30% relative humidity or less. So basically the perfect storm for a huge fire is really, really hot, really, really dry, and really, really windy. And if you guys aren't familiar, the fire triangle is something to consider for wildfires. So fires need 3 things. They need an ignition source, fuel, and oxygen. So the ignition source is heat. So that could be the sun, that could be lightning, that could be a smoldering match. The fuel is what takes the sparks and turns them into flames. So if we're thinking about wildfires, fuel could be anything from dry leaves, dry twigs, dead trees on the ground. There's even something called green fuels, and that's in living vegetation. So pine or evergreens, they contain flammable oils that can burn when they're exposed to heat as well. And then finally, there's oxygen. So as the fuel burns, the flames are fed through oxygen. So when there's air movement or wind, oxygen supplies the fire and makes it bigger, but it also carries it and transports it, which makes it cover a really large area. So how do wildfires start? We've always had wildfires because lightning has been around for a long time. That was the original spark and cause of a lot of wildfires. But now that humans are in the picture, we are the cause of most wildfires. Anything from a cigarette tossed out of a car window to an unattended campfire. And if you guys have been watching the news over the past couple years, gender reveal parties are like the biggest nightmare for wildfires right now in North America. They've been the start of many severe wildfires in Canada and the US. So I'm all for gender reveal parties, but we need to switch so it's not a fire source. Maybe like water or something would be a better way to have these gender reveal parties, because they're causing a lot of problems. But really, I think of the fire triangle now. This is the new fire triangle. 90% of wildfires are caused by human activity. So oxygen and fuel, they're always going to be in the environment. What we can change is us being safe and being practical and not starting so many of these fires. Again, the gender reveals, we got to change them. No more fire and smoke involved with them. So the National put out Oh, unfortunately, my video won't play, but this is a news article from the National. It's just a short video clip that explains why fires are so severe right now. And again, it's looking at that 30-30-30 rule, and it's talking about the climate, why it's becoming so much drier and warmer, and how that's causing more fires than we've seen in the past. So when we're talking about wildfires, we have to talk about climate change. Canada's climate is warming. So since 1948, Canada has warmed by almost 2 degrees, 1.7 degrees Celsius. But one of the things we're seeing is the northern regions of Canada are warming much faster. The northern regions of Canada have increased by 2.3 degrees since 1948. So we're seeing those areas are warming faster. And something that the research has shown with climate change and wildfires is that because the climate is creating warmer and drier conditions, we're seeing that the wildfire season is becoming longer because of these conditions. And also it's increasing the risk of wildfires because it's so warm and dry. So certainly as time goes on, we're already seeing an increase, and we expect this will continue to increase. One of the other points to touch on is precipitation. So we are seeing increased precipitation in some parts in Canada, but what we're usually seeing is there's increased precipitation in the winter and it's drier than ever in the summer. So when we talked about how June is a really important month to determine what the season is going to be like for wildfires, we're seeing it's being really dry in spring and summer and really wet in fall and winter, which is kind of the opposite of what we need for wildfire season. We're seeing a lot of temperature extremes. So the hots are really, really hot and the colds are really, really cold. Watching the news in the morning, you'll see it's the hottest day in the last 20 years or the last 100 years. That number is going to decrease because we're going to see a lot more of those hot days much more frequently. So I've talked about BC, our home province here, for the last few slides, but just because we have fires in BC, smoke can affect you from really, really far away. I just transferred here from Manitoba, and we frequently saw wildfire smoke effects from other provinces, sometimes very far away. This smoke plume you're seeing here, which is above BC, that's actually smoke from a wildfire in Russia. So we get smoke that carries from a really, really far ways away. Here in BC, we have tons of hazy days caused by a lot of the wildfires in the Western United States, in California, Washington State, Oregon. We're really impacted by that, as the other provinces are by wildfires that we have here and in other parts of the country. So we'll jump to Molly now to talk about some of the health effects of wildfire smoke.
Hello. All right. Let's hop over to the next slide. So if you've ever taken like a course on pollution or a course on smoke, you've probably seen the picture of the hair with the particulate matter on it. Particulate matter 10, it's, you know, a couple of them across a hair. PM 2.5 is a couple PM 2.5s across a PM 10. For your average person, these are very, very small particles. For your average microbiologist, they're probably considered very large, but either way, they're one of the primary concerns with regards to your health during a wildfire event. So the long-term health effects of wildfire smoke aren't currently known, and there's not any robust enough research yet to draw any conclusions, but we do know that it has acute health effects, which are short-term health effects. And we know that it can affect across all ages, across all different wellness statuses, from preterm birth weight, low birth weight. It can have effects on diabetic response. It can affect your cognitive function. Even on mental health, it's a very serious issue for some folks. And there are a lot of variables about what is in wildfire smoke. So the fuel type is a big one, the temperature, wind, meteorological conditions, and even what's inside of the smoke is affected by all of these things as well. So next slide, please. You can see from this photo that it's pretty obvious that there's differences in the smoke. The peat wildfire, you can see it's that kind of brown color. The forest wildfire, it's got the big billowing black smoke. The smoldering one is a little bit lighter. Now, you can't tell just by looking at smoke whether or not it's the level of safety. The point that it's making is that the fuel has a very dramatic effect on what is in it. So smoke's not a single, like, clean, even mixture across even one fire. Its composition is affected by a huge number of factors. And this can lead to different sizes of particles, different gases, different vapors, even if it's affecting, especially if it's affecting man-made areas. A wildfire that's just trees is going to be very different than a wildfire that affects a chemical factory, for example. Very dramatic example, but anyway. This variability is what makes understanding and studying wildfire smoke so difficult. You can't really, it's a limited number of times per year that wildfires happen, and trying to understand what's in the smoke and how this complex mixture is affecting a complex mixture of people is very challenging. Next slide, please. So there are some acute health effects of wildfire smoke that affect even your typically healthy person. Eye irritation, sore throat, cough or headache, runny nose, being kind of tired. Some more severe symptoms are shortness of breath, dizziness. This is especially observable in people who are vulnerable to wildfire smoke, like asthmatics. I found some stats that say a person with asthma, or all of the people with asthma, they end up with 43,000 extra puffers per year, an additional 10,000 visits to a hospital due to wildfire smoke. And so wildfire smoke it's significant, as we all are aware. And of course, there's COVID-19 now too. The BC CDC says that the smoky air may increase the risk of COVID. Obviously, we don't have enough data to know for sure, but also it can increase ear infections in children. It's very complex and very interesting. Next slide, please. Vulnerable populations, of course, are most at risk. People with asthma or COPD or other respiratory illnesses, pregnant women, young children, the elderly. Nearly every short-term study agrees that they are the ones who are most affected by wildfire smoke. So if you are in a building that frequently has these populations, or if you permanently house them for healthcare situations, then you really need to make sure that you're on top of your air quality during high smoke days. Next slide, please. So the last one in terms of health effects is mental health. We all have been seeing more of those fun studies about nature baths and being out in nature. Just being there is good for your health, but also people exercise in nature. People see their friends when they go out to parks. Kids get to go and play, you get to walk your dog. So having that denied can be really challenging for people, and especially people who are already immunocompromised and might already have some challenges associated with being out and about. And with COVID, again, not being able to do as many indoor activities means we rely heavily on the outdoors. And if you are a person who is living near a wildfire, you have to worry about the fire itself. I mean, having your entire home, or even the threat of having your entire home destroyed, can really, really severely impact people's mental health. And it's something that needs to be considered as well. Next slide. So how does smoke get into a building? There are so many ways, as I'm sure you're all aware. The most kind of common, obvious one is open doors and windows. The outdoor air gets in. Some of this can be alleviated if you have a vestibule in your building, or if you have rotating doors, but overall, open doors and windows, smoke's gonna get in. Rooftop air handling units are also a very big factor. If there's poor fitting on your filters, or if your filters are not high enough rating, which we'll get into later, the smoke has pretty much free access to your building through your duct system. Same thing with your makeup air and air conditioning units. And if you have a poor building envelope, you can also have issues with smoke. This is, your building envelope is cracks around your windows, not having good seals on the bottom of doors. Just older buildings especially have problems with this. Because buildings tend to be negatively pressurized, the air from the outside finds its way inside through any crack and crevice it can. So that's, while it's probably the smallest way that smoke gets into building, it could be very significant if you have a very old and very poorly sealed building. Next slide. So for HVAC systems, they use something called the MERV filter rating. This is how the filtration effectiveness basically for your HVAC system. MERV ratings range from 1 to 20, although once you get past 17, you typically see them labeled as HEPA filters. These you'll see a lot for like allergens and like hospital settings. Which filters your building has is going to depend very largely on what your building is used for. So a hospital or a library or an electronics lab, they're probably going to have pretty high filtration, but your average like strip mall, they might have something a little bit lower. You'll see from the chart, MERV 14 is where smoke starts to get filtered. And for a lot of things with filtration, tobacco smoke, you can kind of use as your guide. Not very many things are rated for wildfire smoke. So you start to get filtration at MERV 14, but you're not really filtering everything until you hit MERV 17 ratings. Next slide. So HVAC systems, basically every building has them. What you want to do is configure your system for minimum outdoor air recirculation during heavy wildfire smoke times. If you have a lot of people will use the outdoor air to help regulate temperature or humidity or make sure you're not getting too much carbon dioxide in buildings. So if there's a lot of outdoor air recirculation, that's just free access for the smoke. You want to install HEPA filters, MERV 17 or greater, with a big caveat on that. You want to check in with your building staff, your HVAC maintenance contractor before you install new filters willy-nilly. You have to make sure that they're the right size because even like a 1 millimeter gap can make a MERV 15 filter be as effective as a MERV 14. And a 10 millimeter drop can take that MERV 15 down to a MERV 8. So you have to have the right fit. You have to be using the right type of filter that's installed correctly. And just installing a heavier filter can lead to HVAC issues. It can make it can off balance your system, or it can, it can lead to sort of poor life overall. It makes it harder for the system to recirculate the air. It has to work a little bit harder, so it's usually quite a bit less energy efficient. So just make sure you check in with your qualified contractor before you start installing new filters. You're going to want to install charcoal filters. These are going to filter out the gases. So the MERV filters are going to do your particulates, but those can't really be super effective against gases that might be present. If you are in a building or a situation where air refuges are possible, you might want to consider doing those. These are rooms or areas that are specifically dedicated to having the most filtered, cleanest air possible. And I'll talk more about those later on. So understanding your building is also important, as discussed with the building envelope issues. Air travels through buildings in a super, super complex way. It's really challenging just to look at a building and understand how the air is getting in and out of it. I mean, you have different offices, you have different HVAC zones, there are stairwells and doors and windows, and qualified building professionals who specialize in ventilation engineering can help you determine how vulnerable your building is and help you offer solutions to your problems. You also want to make sure you're thinking about all of this way ahead of time, like sooner than later. Trying to get a HVAC maintenance person out, trying to buy new filters, trying to get a envelope professional lined up. All of this is going to be way more challenging in the heart of fire and smoke season because everybody else is the same idea. So if you have everything lined up ahead of time, you can make any modifications to your HVAC, your building, have plans, have supplies already ahead of time. And Heather will tell you more about that later. Next slide, please. Portable air cleaners are an awesome option for a lot of buildings, especially older ones or places where they can't necessarily swap out filters. Again, you're going to want HEPA filters. These are going to be your most effective. I'm going to run you guys through a couple different acronyms. The AHAM, which is the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, is a California-based operation that will make sure that what you're buying does what it says on the box. They make sure that your filters are going to actually be rated and do the right amount of work and filter things they're supposed to. And best part, in my opinion, is they also only certify low ozone emitters. Ozone generators are bad for people's health, and you don't want to accidentally end up with one of those. So the clean air delivery rate, the CADR, is in cubic feet per minute. It indicates the volume of filtered air delivered by an air cleaner. So this little label that I have on the side there, it shows the different ratings for tobacco smoke and pollen and dust. So high number equals faster, bigger filtration. You want a unit that has a tobacco smoke rating, which is the closest thing to wildfire smoke, that is at least 2/3 your room area. So let's say you have a 10 by 12 foot room, it's 120 square feet. That means that you would want an air cleaner with a tobacco smoke CADR of at least 80. You want to make sure you're following the maintenance schedule on the device. And for many people, heat stress can be just as big of a concern, if not bigger, than smoky air. While it's good to run these with windows closed and, make sure that you're keeping everybody in a tight space, with COVID and with heat stress, you want to also make sure you're not sacrificing one health effect for another. Or on the side of overkill with these filters, a lot of filter ratings are only for best case scenarios, and efficiency might actually end up lower than posted. So with portable air cleaners and with your HVAC, you're going to want to make sure you're changing the filters, not necessarily every time they're dirty, but definitely before they get overloaded. And that's something that, requires frequent checking and probably a base touching with whoever is providing the air filter, if you're renting them from someone or from your HVAC contractor. Next slide. So how many air scrubbers do you need? There's some math you can do to figure it out. But it's a little bit more complex, since most buildings are not just a big square or a big cube, they're not even squares. Most rooms are not just one big cube. There's a lot, there's HVAC zones to consider. There are many other rooms, there's a lot of pathways. So always nice to ask for some guidance from a mechanical professional. But overall, what you're looking for is 10 air changes per hour. You want to make sure you're considering your HVAC zones, like you want to have scrubbers in each zone so nobody's getting neglected. An example is you have a 2,500 cubic feet per meter or per minute air scrubber, produces 10 air changes per hour in a 1,500 square foot room with 10-foot ceilings. It sounds a little bit complicated, and yes, there is math involved. Next slide, please. The impact of wildfires isn't just smoke getting into your buildings. Soot and smoke can be deposited inside through people. They track it in on their shoes, they track it in on their clothes. Fire retardants that you see in the cool photo here, them spraying across buildings, those can end up on buildings, although I think most of the time they make sure that stuff is biodegradable, so you can just kind of hose off a building if that happens. The worst case scenario, of course, is a building that is partially or fully caught on fire. And that means that your concerns are far greater than air quality at that point. Next slide. I just like this photo of the wildfire service. I think it's very cool that there are people who have decided they want to make their life jumping out of planes and protecting us from fires and being super cool and awesome while they do it. I mean, I don't know. I just think it's a really cool thing that deserves a little bit of recognition while we're thinking about wildfires. Next slide.
Okay, so I'm going to jump back in here and talk about monitoring smoke and mitigation strategies for wildfire. So there are a few main tools we'll talk about for monitoring the smoke that's outdoors, and I'll go into detail about each of them, but the ones we're going to focus on are the Air Quality Health Index, BLUESKY, FIREWORK, and the BC Wildfire Map. So the first one we're going to look at is the Air Quality Health Index. This is available as a mobile app. It's also available on your desktop. The AQHI icon you see on the bottom left, that's what the app looks like. If you guys want to pull out your phone and download it right now, it's a free app. This is a really, really great app that's available. There's a couple of things that it looks at. So it looks at the outdoor air pollution. So it's looking at ozone, PM 2.5, that's particulate, and NO2 as well. So it's looking at all three of the indicator pollutants and ranking the outdoor air quality based on that. Why this is unique is because previous health indexes looked at all of these pollutants separately or only looked at one of them. So having a combined approach is a much better way to base your decisions on whether you should be outdoors or indoors, looking at all of the major pollutants. So this app will rank the outdoor air quality every day. And what we see here is anything above a 7 or higher would be poor air quality, where you should consider reducing your time outdoors. The one con about this app is that it's only available in most major cities. It is available throughout the world, but if you are in a small town, this might not be available for you. But the other resources coming up are alternate ways that you can track wherever you are in the world. So really great app. You can set it up to set up notifications in certain parts of the province. So you'll get a text or an app if there's ever a time where maybe you shouldn't be mountain biking outdoors or like going on your outdoor run that day. Maybe a day to hit the treadmill instead. So BLUESKY is another app. It's available online. This is really, really a great application if the previous app doesn't work for you. So what this website does is it models how smoke is going to move over 48 hours into the future. So if I were playing this, it's a live video feed basically, or a live image that will show how smoke will move over the course of 48 hours. So you can kind of predict when your area is going to be hit the hardest. So this is super valuable. This fire here that we're looking at was sort of in between the Manitoba and Saskatchewan border. And you can see there's some smoke plumes where that number 3 is. And you can see how it will move over 48 hours. It's a really great app to predict when things are going to happen in your region. So really similar to BLUESKY is the next app. It's called FIREWORK, and this is run by the government, and it's available during the fire season from April to October. It's very similar to BLUESKY, where it's predicting where smoke from wildfires will travel over the next 2 days. This image here, it's from 2015, but we still use it because it's a really active image to show you. This was a very, very large fire that occurred. I think it was in the northwestern portion of Saskatchewan is the origin of the fire. And you can see how severe. About 4 provinces surrounding it were severely impacted, and we had smoke that went all the way into the eastern United States. So it's a really good image that, again, that demonstrates how far smoke can travel. And then lastly, another great resource is the BC Wildfire Dashboard. This is again available for mobile or desktop. And what's different than the other apps here is you can look at a lot of historical data. It also will give you the status of the fire. So you'll know if it's under control, how big of an area it's impacted, and also if there's any evacuation associated with it. So this is less on the prediction of air quality and smoke and more what the current state of the fire is. So this is another great app, another great tool for you guys to utilize. So the apps I just talked about focused on monitoring your outdoor air quality, and that's really important to know when your outdoor air is impacted, because what we really care about during this time is if it's going to impact our indoor air quality. If the air is so bad outside, we have to stay indoors. We want to make sure that indoor air quality is not compromised either. So one of the most popular things that our clients are moving to is what's called active indoor air quality monitoring. What you see on the middle right-hand side of your screen is a sensor, and that would be installed in multiple locations throughout your building. This sensor, upon install, reads your air quality 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's great because you can get real-time data and reports from anywhere, available on your phone, available from your desktop. If you want to proactively look at it all the time, you absolutely can. But if you want to forget about it and just get a text or an email or some sort of alert when there's a problem, you can set that up as well. It's a totally customizable dashboard and program, and it's really great. A lot of our clients have applied it for wildfire smoke, but they've also started applying it for COVID and just other general indoor air quality factors as well. It's really great, particularly for wildfires, because we can see when your indoor air quality is starting to become negatively impacted by the outdoor smoke. You can make key decisions based on how high the particulate level is inside of your building. And one of the things I just wanted to touch point on here was, before COVID, indoor air quality was noted as the thing that building occupants cared the most about their indoor environment. And I think as we're working at home, I'm working at home right now, it might be a bit of a stretch to try and get people to come back into the office. So demonstrating that you are caring about the occupants' indoor air quality and providing the best possible, this is the #1 way to demonstrate that. And it really comes into play with wildfires, but also with COVID. People are caring a lot about their HVAC. And I think this is one way you can really show people that you're taking action, you're monitoring, and hopefully bring them back to the workplace. So this shows some monitoring that we did with those sensors and what happens to the indoors during wildfires. So normally, when it's just normal every day outside, there are no wildfires, we see numbers usually hovering. The average for a commercial building is actually about 16 milligrams per cubic meter. So that's a little bit, this building actually looks like their average is a little bit cleaner than normal. But when we hit some wildfire seasons, we saw huge spikes in the indoor particulate matter. So when there was a wildfire in Northern and Central California, we had a pretty big spike, and an even larger one with a second fire in Paradise, California. So that outdoor smoke was getting into the building at these times, and that's when we needed to apply some of the corrections Molly talked about earlier to the HVAC system, to air cleaners, to really help manage the air quality and deliver good air quality in this space. Molly's going to jump back in to talk about some potential tools.
Right. So one of the top tools that you see every wildfire season, and now we see all the time, is respiratory protection. Respiratory protection for wildfire smoke comes with a very large caveat that you really have to have a fit, tested, and proper respirator. Luckily now with COVID, so it's kind of weird to say that, but we actually have some more commercially available respirators that are of a appropriate rating that are available a lot more easily to your average consumer. So classic N95, a KN95 is also appropriate, or a KF94. All of those, or better, are really great. Even a perfect COVID mask, the sort of BCCDC gold star mask of 3 layers with a nose wire, that has a mask fitter that fits very snugly. That can actually work pretty well, not nearly as well as these, but a 2-layer cloth mask, a paper mask, a surgical mask, those aren't really going to do anything against wildfire smoke. And in non-pandemic times, there's always a lot of concern that wearing a mask gives people a false sense of security about wildfire smoke, when you really do need to have, if you're going to be out for a jog, you would definitely want something a little bit more robust than a cloth mask. Fit test is of course preferred, but fit testing isn't possible or practical for people who are like kids. They don't usually make kid size N95s. If you have a lot of facial hair, or even some people with just different face shapes, it can be very difficult to find a fit test appropriate respirator. If you're going to be doing outdoor work, like if you're a landscaper or you manage like parks departments or something like that, you're going to want a respirator that focuses primarily on filtering out PM. It's nice to have gas filters or vapor filters if you have them, but truly no single respirator can effectively protect you against all things inside of smoke. So particulate matter is the primary concern. A proper mask, properly fit tested mask, can reduce smoke exposure pretty significantly. But even if it's a very, very, very smoky day, even with a respirator that's fit tested, it can still lead to exposures that are above recommended limits. So you always have to kind of keep that in mind if you're going to be relying on a fit tested respirator for working outdoors. These do not have an unlimited shelf life either. If for some reason you still have a stockpile of them, make sure you get them changed out every 5 years. And overall, your best bet is going to be staying in an air filtered room, limited your physical activity, and trying to, not be outdoors really. Next slide. Air refuges are a very, very important tool for certain populations. This is especially true for long-term housing or for hospitals. These are often also public buildings that have really good air filtration systems. I'm sure we've all seen news reports, or at least if you're in a smoky area, you've seen public health announcements. If you can't stay in, if you're in the outdoor air is really bad, you can go to a mall, you can go to a library, you can go to a cinema. They tend to have really nice, robust HVAC systems that will filter out that smoky air. Now, if you're in a hospital or a healthcare setting or something like that, or even if you happen to have some kind of like electronics that you're dealing with somewhere where you need to make sure you have a very, very, very clean air, you can make specific rooms. These rooms, you should really have a lot of considerations for them. It can be as simple as finding an interior room that doesn't have windows where smoke can get in, that is near a washroom so people can use the washroom, that has all of your accessibility needs met, that has Wi-Fi or snacks or whatever else people might need to stay in there for an extended period of time. Good filtration, of course. That's kind of all you need. But with COVID, you also need physical distancing, and you also need to consider that you're not going to, again, create an issue with too much heat stress. So if you are a building manager of a building with robust air systems, malls and libraries and all of that, prepare for an uptick in visitors during smoky times. And if you are somebody who is dealing with vulnerable populations, try to consider ahead of time where you might create a air refuge. The BC CDC, and I'm sure your local health authorities as well, have really great guidelines on how to make these up and what sort of considerations you should have when you're creating one. And next slide.
Okay, so I'm going to jump back in again and we'll talk about what you guys are really here for is, okay, we get it, but now what do we do? How do we be prepared for this upcoming wildfire season? And the first thing is to develop a management plan. The most important thing you can do is to prepare, and to prepare early. I can't stress that enough. The key here is to prepare ahead of time, to prepare early. So really the goal of a management plan is to protect the building, but also the occupants inside, to make sure there's effective communication between all of the stakeholders involved. So the contractors, if you're renting air scrubbers and equipment, the building managers, and all of the occupants inside. Your content and the bulk of your plan, which we'll talk about coming up, should really consider a few main things. So certainly any regulatory requirements, make sure you're complying with the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the responsibilities of the stakeholders and how and who they will communicate to, what the communication lines are. We talked about indoor air quality monitoring and a response plan. That's really important so you can determine if the indoor air quality in your building is being negatively impacted by wildfire smoke. And then also mitigating those problems with looking at your HVAC system, possible air scrubbers as well. So making sure you have lists and checklists of what your current models are for your HVAC system. Specifically looking at the HVAC system and air cleaners, evaluate your building HVAC systems now. So have your HVAC contractor come to the site right now before wildfire season has really kicked off and see what size and efficiency filters you need, and buy them now before they sell out. It's like the hottest day of the year when everyone goes to Canadian Tire and buys a fan and there aren't any left. It's the exact same in sort of an emergency response situation for wildfires. Those filters, those air scrubbers are going to be in high demand and low supply if you wait until it's too late. So really important to prepare ahead of time, get those people in here now and secure any of the supplies you might need. So filtration, and we'll talk about the relationships contractor side on the next slide. Another thing to look at is look at the HVAC zones in your building. Do air quality monitoring in those different zones to see if you can identify any problems. Molly talked about some envelope issues earlier, a few slides ago. And if there's an envelope issue in a certain part of your building or the whole building, you want to make sure that you can combat that during wildfire season, so you're not getting higher levels of smoke in that area. So relationships, huge important part of wildfire planning. If you are going to purchase your equipment, like certain air cleaners, certain filters, do that now, and or make some relationships with your local restoration contractors now as well. As I said in the last slide, if you wait until the last minute, you are likely not going to get what you need, or you're going to be charged through the roof for it. A lot of our clients will call us when it's too late and all of the equipment is gone. So establishing those relationships ahead of time with restoration contractors are absolutely key. We've partnered with several restoration companies in the past where we've reserved air scrubbers for our clients. So we make sure they're available when they need them. And we've already established our rates and our maintenance schedule ahead of time. So we know exactly what we're going to expect once the fire is over. And the biggest tool is arguably what your decision-making process is going to be when a wildfire eventually occurs. So a really important thing is knowing who is responsible for what and when. We talked about monitoring the outdoor air quality, which is definitely very useful. But the good thing about monitoring the indoor air quality is you can set certain action limits for certain levels of particulate in the building. So you can say when particulate levels get to X amount, this will happen. You'll install different filters in your HVAC system. If it gets to this level, we'll install air scrubbers throughout the building. So it alleviates a lot of stress and can save a lot of time and money and really just headaches to establish a plan ahead of time like this. Also making sure you have your modified maintenance schedules also. This is one thing. These air scrubbers that Molly's talked about, they do require maintenance. You do have to change the filters on these systems. So making sure you know who's going to do this, how often they're going to come in, and what the cost of replacing these filters are. Very important. So we've been working with indoor air quality and specifically indoor air quality related to wildfire smoke for years and years and years. And we've done every project from one small little site to huge portfolios of tons of buildings throughout the country during wildfire season. And this is what we've identified as the common challenges and also what those solutions would be that you might frequently see during wildfires. The first challenge obviously is waiting until it's too late, looking for solutions when the wildfire is at its peak and the outdoor air quality is really bad. It's very hard to procure that equipment then. So as we mentioned earlier, a key solution is to establish those relationships early, both on the side of your local restoration contractor who can supply air scrubbers for you, also your HVAC operator who might be installing new filters for you, and also your consultant who might be doing air testing for you. Secondly, risk communication is really key, and a lot of occupants tend to get very concerned when there's a wildfire occurring. They see all over the news how bad the air quality is outside. Now they're not sure if they can go to work because it might be bad there. Well, it's really good to monitor this and to communicate the importance of staying indoors. But another thing to communicate is, luckily, commercial systems are going to have better air quality than residential systems. So probably in a case of when it's wildfire season, you're going to be safer in your office than you are at home. Another thing to communicate would be little things like, if you're having an air scrubber installed, who's coming and when, how to operate the system. I've seen time and time again that air scrubbers get installed in a building, but someone might find it a little too loud, it's throwing off their focus, so they unplug it. And you're paying for this system for potentially weeks or months, depending on the season, and you're not getting anything out of it if it's not plugged in. So making sure you communicate little things we sometimes overlook are really important to make sure you let everyone know about. Filter changes are something that can sometimes get people by surprise. As I mentioned, these units, the air scrubbers and your HVAC system, you do need to change the filters. Making sure you have a maintenance schedule discussed ahead of time and the costs associated with that is really important. The first few fire jobs we did, we were given a price for the air scrubber rental, and we were hit with a lot of hidden fees afterwards when we saw they had changed the filters multiple times, been back to the site multiple times. So knowing the whole price is really important ahead of time. You can negotiate some better rates and communicate with the occupants ahead of time of when people will be in the building. And finally, another thing we've seen is sometimes collecting air scrubbers can be challenging. We've done several projects with really large portfolios. We have one client here in BC where during wildfire season, they will deploy air scrubbers in 30 or 40 buildings. And it's totally essential to have really good records to keep track of this. Knowing how many units are deployed in each building isn't enough. We need to know where they are in each building and also recording the serial numbers for each of them. Our first few jobs were a bit of an Easter egg hunt to make sure we've collected them all, that they're all accounted for when you're dealing with a high number of air scrubbers in a large portfolio. Very important to keep your records straight here. So we're just on time for our presentation. We have a few minutes here for questions. If we don't get to all of them, as I mentioned earlier, we can reach out to you guys directly if there are more questions. This is my contact information here if you guys would like to reach out. We have recorded this presentation and I'm happy to provide a copy to all of you guys if you're interested in the future. We can also provide you with a PDF of the slides as well. Please check our website. Pynchon offers lots of complimentary sessions always. And I'm happy also, if this is a session that might be interesting for your other coworkers, I'm happy to present on an individual basis as well. So please feel free to reach out. We would really appreciate it. So while we answer some questions, I will put this QR code on the screen. This is a survey of how we did in this presentation today. If there's more topics you guys want to see, this really helps us guide what we're going to deliver next for our next session. So if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes at the end of the presentation and filling this out, we would really appreciate the feedback. Yasmin, could you let us know if there were any questions for the Q&A?
Nothing that I see.
Okay. Well, I take it then that this was a very thorough presentation and you guys have no questions at this time. Maybe you need to digest a couple of different questions. Feel free to reach out to us at our contact info. If you guys do think of anything later, we would be happy to chat one-on-one.
Sorry, Heather. Someone said that they would like a copy of the recorded presentation in PDF.
Absolutely, we can do that. Henry, I can see this here. We will send you information on both the recorded and the PDF session. No problem. Tammy, I see you want one too. We got you covered. Tammy also asked a question, where do you get sensors? So the indoor air quality sensors we're talking about, this is something that our company Pynchon does deploy. So if really what we need to deploy this is building drawings, and we can estimate how many you'll need for your building and get you a quote from there. So Tammy, if you want to reach out to me directly, I'd be happy to get you a quote and kind of walk you through the process of the air quality sensors. Generally, if you're looking for a price, I think the last price I saw, if you're looking for a ballpark, is it's about 15 cents a square foot, if that gives you an idea of what you're looking for. That's based on a couple of our recent installs. That's generally the going rate. Okay. I think that's all the questions we have for now, guys. Thank you so much for participating with us this afternoon. We'll let you get back to the rest of your day. Those of you that responded in the chat, I will make sure to send you guys a copy of the presentation. And again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions in the future. Be safe for your wildfire season and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.